So paragraph 9. Consider the mass neurotic syndrome so pervasive in the younger generation. There's plenty of empirical evidence that the three facets of this syndrome, he refers to depression, aggression, and addiction from earlier, are due to what's called in logotherapy the existential vacuum. A feeling of emptiness and meaninglessness. So he defines the existential vacuum for us there. It goes without saying that not each and every case of depression is to be traced back to a feeling of meaningless, nor does suicide always result from an existential vacuum. But even if each and every case of suicide had been undertaken out of a feeling of meaninglessness, it may well be an individual's impulse to take his life would have been overcome had he been aware of some meaning and purpose worth living for. And so again, it points to the idea about suicide, which we know a good deal about, especially since this was written in 1983, that suicide doesn't just happen because people are depressed. Suicide happens because people are feeling hopeless about the future. In other words, if you get sad, but you're aware that it will get better, you tend to struggle through that. Depression is not going to necessarily kill people off. In fact, depression stops people from doing things. But the idea is that you think that things won't get better. So, for example, I'm sure you've heard the idea that when people are going to commit suicide, all of a sudden they're happy, and they seem like surprisingly happy, and then they're like, oh my God, but he's been so happy the past couple of days. And then you find out it's because the person made the decision to do it, so now there's like a load taken off of them. That's the sense of hope that they're deriving from that. Oh, soon it'll all be over. Rather than clinging to the idea that soon it'll all be over, it's better to channel that into something that you can look at and say, things will be better tomorrow because of this. We talked a bunch about that in the past, so I'll leave it at that. But the idea is to find some little type of meaning to go on, some type of a purpose to get to tomorrow. Because tomorrow, is tomorrow going to be better? I don't know. Maybe it's going to be worse. Will next week be better? I don't know. Maybe it's going to be worse. Will next month be better? Maybe. But we do find that things do get better. Things do get better, but you've got to survive long enough to see things get better. You've got to be present in that future to see that the future is better. And what's the worst case scenario? Things stay as bad as they are. Well, you're alive today, so that proves you can get through it. So maybe stick around longer and longer as necessary to find the better day. Because again, you've got to be present in it. So, paragraph 11, he continues, if thus a strong meaning orientation. By meaning orientation, he's saying like a direction towards meaning, a direction towards something in life that's meaningful. And I use this kind of a phrase frequently with us, to orient our lives, to point our lives towards some type of a meaningful purpose, some type of a meaningful thing. If a strong meaning orientation plays a decisive role in the prevention of suicide, what about intervention in cases where there is a suicide risk? As a young doctor, I spent 4 years in Austria's largest state hospital, where I was in charge of the pavilion in which severely depressed patients were accommodated. And so he goes on there to say something very similar to what I was just saying, that you have to live to see the day in which things get better, because they will get better. They will get better. And then, by the way, there's something valuable there. If you're looking for some kind of a meaning to keep going, there's a great one right there. Don't you wish you had someone that you could kind of rely on or to help navigate you through those really difficult times? In other words, wouldn't your life be easier and better for you right now if you're going through something like that? If you just had someone who could relate to you and talk you through how they got through it? Well, there's your meaning, there's your purpose, because you're going through it right now maybe. And then you can be that person for somebody else in the future. When you get to that point of having gotten through it, you can give that kind of advice to other people. And so that very person that you're wishing you had today, you can be for someone else in the future, but you've got to get there first. It's just like if you want to become a teacher, what should you do? First off, you should rethink it. And then secondly, let's say you still are committed to it. Remember, don't try. But let's say you're still committed to doing it. What should you do? Well, first you've got to learn something to teach somebody. You have to have something to teach. And I'm sure you get a sense of that. I'm sure some teachers you have where you think that what they have to teach you, you could get from a book, because they might be teaching straight from a book or a binder or something like that. And I'm sure that you have other teachers who you look at and say, what's coming at me is not something I can get from a book. And that's probably stuff that you value more than the first one. Maybe, perhaps. So if maybe you're the person who can not just read to someone from a book. When suffering from depression, you should, instead, you can tell the person, when suffering from depression, here's what I did. You can be that person in the future. As for addiction, paragraph 13, he goes on, I'm reminded of the findings presented by Anne-Marie von Forstmeyer, who noted that, as evidenced by tests and statistics, 90% of the alcoholics she studied had suffered from an abysmal feeling of meaninglessness. Of the drug addicts studied by Stanley Krippner, 100% believed that, quote, things seemed meaningless. Now, the point he's making there is that we turn to drug abuse when we are trying to seek some type of a meaning in life. We're trying to escape our meaning. But I'd encourage you to consider it maybe from a more cause and effect standpoint. I know that none of you guys in here, of course, but I'm sure you have friends who use drugs and drink and all that. Just not you guys. For the people you know, did anybody sit down and go, you know what, man, my life is meaningless. I'm going to become addicted to drugs. You know, drug addiction is nobody sets out saying, I'm going to become an addict. Drug addiction is a byproduct of starting to use these things in the first place. And so just to kind of make the point a little bit more precisely from what he's saying here, it isn't that we set out to become alcoholics. We don't set out to become drug addicts. But we set out to escape some type of a reality. And then we become dependent on those things because the reality that we're escaping to for those moments is better than the reality from which we're escaping, which, seems to make sense in important ways. So, paragraph 15, how does a human being go about finding meaning? Logotherapy, and again, that's his process of therapy, conceives of conscience as a prompter, which indicates the direction in which we have to go in a given situation. In order to carry out such a task, conscience must apply a measuring stick to the situation one is confronted with. And this situation has to be evaluated in the light of a set of criteria, in the light of a hierarchy of values. These values, however, cannot be espoused and adopted on a conscious level. There's something that we are. So it's again this expression of what you are, the individual that you are. They have crystallized in the course of the evolution of our species and found in our biological past and are rooted in our biological depth. And that's an interesting thing there. It's a suggestion that, again, going back to today's quote, the idea of becoming an individual. None of us is 100% entirely an individual. We're part of a group. Like you have a cat, if any of you guys have cats and you notice that your cats, or even your dogs, have little personality quirks, but they're still a cat or a dog. In other words, they do still do cat stuff, and they do still do dog stuff. But there's little quirks here and there. Those are those little bits and pieces of personality. But by and large, we're members of a species who seem to behave in similar ways. What that suggests is that we have similar ways of, similar internal purposes that can manifest themselves in these hierarchy of values. So what do we value? Meaning, purpose, whatever. But we tend to agree on what these things are, just biologically. Paragraph 17, he says, it teaches us there are 3 avenues on which one arrives at meaning in life. So if you want to find meaning in life, here you go. You know those Instagram quotes where people say, I wish I learned something useful in school? Frankl would say, then point to this. I was talking to somebody about that yesterday. When people say things like, man, I wish we learned something useful in school, like how to rent an apartment, how to do taxes. Show of hands. And I will do this, by the way. How many of you guys want to study a rental agreement after this? I can go get one. I can bring one in from what an apartment looks like. There's always one. Yeah, I can bring in a rental agreement that will show you all the terms and conditions of renting an apartment. Or you just learn how to read, and then they'll do the exact same thing for you. But if you guys would rather learn about rental agreements on properties, we can definitely look at that. But then don't complain when I give it to you. It's so boring. Just think it'd be exciting. It's like people say, I wish we learned how to do taxes. Well, you do. You read the instructions, then you do basic math. It's addition, multiplication, subtraction, and division. Just because you've never done an audit tax form doesn't mean you don't have those skills. And again, would you rather look at about how to find meaning in life or an apartment rental agreement? Individual, I suppose. The first is created, he says, the first is by creating a work or doing a deed. The second is by experiencing something or encountering someone. In other words, meaning can be found not only in work, but also in love. So what can get you through? Well, love. And so if you guys if you have parents who work jobs that they hate for too little money and too many hours and not enough appreciation, why are they, you look at them and go, why are you doing that? You're just like a cog in a machine. or whatever, that's why they're doing it, because they love you, even if you don't realize it. And remember, love is not just sentimental. We looked at the Greek forms of love. It's not just sentimental, it's also duty. We do things because we love. Love is a verb. Most important, however, is the third avenue to meaning in life. Even the helpless victim of a hopeless situation, facing a fate he cannot change, may rise above himself, may grow beyond himself, and by so doing, change himself. He may turn a personal tragedy into a triumph by taking pride in suffering. And that's an important point. This goes back to a lot of what we talked about with regards to Nietzsche. You take there's suffering that's there. How do you find meaning? Well, by overcoming your suffering. Well, things just hurt right now. I can't find meaning. Here's a meaning for you. Overcome your suffering. Transcend the suffering. Find something that's worth living for, and then do that thing. But you got to find it first. And because if you have as Nietzsche says, if you have a why, if you have a reason, well, you can survive anyhow. Well, how do I get through this? You overcome it. You do the work itself. You'll find a way to overcome suffering if you have a reason to. You know? If you guys know what postpartum depression is, it's when women will have babies, and then there's this like severe depression that sets in oftentimes after childbirth. Because I'm not an expert in these areas at all, but I imagine it's because you kind of look at a life that's completely changed, that now you're really hitched to this little being that's now crying in a crib that you can't really fix in any way, and you kind of look forward to a life that looks all like that and looks very sad and depressing. Well, how do you overcome that? Well, by falling in love with that baby, and then realizing, wow, I don't mind giving my whole life to this little thing because I love it so much. And so, it's a scary thing to think that a lot of us, man, that's how our parents began. As many problems as we might have with our parents today, a lot of times this is how it all began. Them looking at you as a baby and saying, I want better for you than I had for myself. I'm not going to make the mistakes that my parents did, even though we mostly do. And then, of course, again, overcoming that depression thing and saying, I don't mind pouring myself into it. And then fast forward 15 years, you know, I hate you. I want my phone back. So paragraph 19, he again gives us some examples of overcoming suffering, carries through to paragraph 20. And he refers to Jerry Long, a gentleman who was paralyzed from the neck down after an accident and then overcame that suffering. And you can actually go up online and look up Jerry Long. He ended up becoming a psychologist, and he gives talks from his wheelchair. You know? And so he's an interesting guy. He's a real dude. So, questions about those so far?